G'day, brothers and sisters, and everyone else. This is the other Paul, and I'm joined again by my good mate Jeff from America.
Howdy.
G'day, mate. And today we'll be responding to another set of Catholic apologists, some ones who are much more respectful and cordial than good old Ferris from before. So definitely more tolerable in that way. But in some ways, their arguments are
crazy.
You're gonna see what they're trying to the rabbit they're trying to pull out of the hat here. It's actually quite beautiful in a messy way. Basically, the dangers of unrestrained typology when you don't have any restraint within the scriptures and letting the scripture interpret itself. It's going to be a beautiful mess.
I think today, beyond responding to their argument about transubstantiation, which is what we're going over, it's more a case study in how not to do typology.
Yeah, exactly. It's a beautiful and scary example of typological eisegesis and just how insane you can get if you don't let the scriptures be their own interpreter. On top of historical context and language and all that, but the scriptures fundamentally as interpreting themselves.
I'm not sure what word you have for it, but we would kind of like what they call a governor or something, like if you rent a car and it prevents you from going too fast or something. Like there's no brakes, there's no what I would say, nothing that controls the typology.
Yeah, that's right. No restraint.
It just runs amok.
Oh well, hang on. No, there is one restraint on the typology: the church. So that's
sola ecclesia.
That's what exactly. That's why we say that sola ecclesia. I honestly I don't know. Well, I mean, I can kind of see why Catholics don't like that because it's a solo. We're not like that. We're a plurality of tradition and authorities and not. No, come on, guys. It's sola ecclesia. Let's be real. Especially with that Brian Cross comment you got when he said about how the magisterium works with interpreting scripture and all that.
Well, we haven't recorded that video yet.
We haven't. I
haven't recorded the video yet, but that's a prelude to. Just for the listeners, I did a video on the psychology of Catholic conversion. Brian Cross responded to it in a comments on something, and I'll be Paul has seen the script for the response, and which will be on his blog at some point.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I was alluding to how one of Cross's responses just to keep it brief so we can actually get on, basically how it doesn't matter that the church doesn't have infallible interpretations of the scriptures because it's not about the scriptures on their own per se, but just the general paradigm of the church itself. As long as that's established, then we go back and read the scriptures through that lens, which is like the way Cross said it. I don't really do justice, but the way Cross said it is frightening. It is scary with basically how the scriptures have no power in themselves. There's no power in God's own word anymore. It's all the church, which is horrific.
Yeah, they're not really so much concerned as what's this scripture mean? But
exactly. Yeah. Anyway, with that out of the way, we're gonna first, before we begin this video, it is important to establish what the church or the Catholic Church understands as the miracle of transubstantiation at the Eucharist, because when you have that definition understood and in your head, you're going to see how Albrecht and Father Kappes, I don't believe it's intentional. I would not ascribe that kind of intention unless there's evidence for that. But they really do rely, even if they don't know it, on the ignorance of their viewers with respect to what transubstantiation actually entails. Because they'll point to so many examples of alleged substance changes in the Bible as proof of as proof of a kind of act of transubstantiation, but they are in no way analogous. So, I'm going to start first with reading from the Roman Catholic Catechism, specifically paragraph 13 or section 1374, which describes the miracle of the Eucharist, and then I'm going to read from the citation it appeals to, which is it's a papal bull, I think, a papal publication that basically describes it in better detail. But briefly, the mode of Christ's presence under the Eucharistic species is unique. It raises the Eucharist above all the sacraments as the perfection and spiritual life and the end to which all the sacraments tend. In the most blessed sacrament of the Eucharist, our Lord Jesus Christ, and therefore the whole Christ, is truly, really, and substantially contained. Keep that in mind, substantially. That's the key word there. This presence is called real, by which it is not intended to exclude other types of presence as if they could not be real too, but because it is the presence in the fullest sense. That is to say, it is a substantial presence by which Christ, God, and man makes himself wholly and entirely present. And in that, it cites, the main citation it appeals to is a papal document called Mysterium Fidei, which has an even longer description of the miracle of the Eucharist, so that people understand what is happening with transubstantiation, how it works, the like. And specifically, the best way to look at it here is paragraph 46, which describes that miracle in full. To avoid any misunderstanding of this type of presence, which goes beyond the laws of nature and constitutes the greatest miracle of its kind, we have to listen with docility to the voice of teaching and praying church. Her voice, which constantly echoes the voice of Christ, assures us that the way in which Christ becomes present in the sacrament is through the conversion of the whole substance of the bread into his body and the whole substance of the wine into his blood. A unique and truly wonderful conversion that the Catholic Church fittingly and properly calls transubstantiation. As a result of transubstantiation, the species of bread and wine undoubtedly take on a new signification and a new finality, for they are no longer ordinary bread and wine, but instead a sign of something sacred and a sign of spiritual food. But they take on this new signification, this new finality, precisely because they contain a new reality, which we rightly call ontological. For what now lies beneath the aforementioned species is not what was there before, but something completely different. And not just in the estimation of the church belief, but in reality. Since once the substance or nature of the bread and wine has been changed into the body and blood of Christ, nothing remains of the bread and wine except for the species beneath which Christ is present, whole and entire in his physical reality, corporeally present, although not in a manner in which bodies are in place. And what this is describing is some Aristotelian concepts of of ontology, which has metaphysics. That's it. Which has the idea of a substance and of accidents or species in this case. And to put it briefly,
Paul, the best way of saying it is like an accident is like the properties you can see and stuff.
Yep, that's right. So everything in the bread and wine, or any other example, the most common example I see used is like a chair. The things that you can, the way in which you can sense it. So how it appears, what it feels like, what it smells like, what it tastes like. If you're talking about food, its properties as well. Those are the accidents. Those are the things that manifest in our physical reality. Whereas the substance of a thing is the being, the existence of that thing in and of itself. So you'll often see an example brought up if you're being taught about this, how you've got a chair and the accidents of a chair is the material it's made out of, its hardness, its weight, all those normal properties. But the substance of the chair is a kind of chairness. So in its very being, it is a chair, which it can be a little bit hard to grasp at times, but with a little bit more reading, you can kind of get it hammered into there.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that we don't really believe in Aristotle's metaphysics anymore.
Not really, no. Like in practice, no.
What's that?
In practice, no. Maybe some really traditionalist Catholics, I've seen them kind of try to consistently apply that.
Yeah, so outside of traditionalist Catholics, no one really operates with these categories. And I've read articles and stuff from Catholic priests and stuff who are, getting on this is like, I don't know if people who hold this position know what they are affirming.
Yeah.
I just
beyond
in the back of our mind.
Exactly. Yeah. Beyond the rad trads. Normal people don't.
No. I mean even the rad trads. Like when you push, when you push, you're like, well, what's it mean to have like a physical body without physical attributes? What's that?
Right.
What's that mean? How's that different than a spirit?
Right. Yeah. And in the case, I remember seeing a pretty decent paper that more or less in detail said that the idea of the bread and wine being in every sense in our senses bread and wine, and yet in some ethereal substance being the body and blood of Christ is, well, more or less meaningless, even on a philosophical level. But that's
not just that. So I mean, we'll get into this is just more like background to keep in mind when we're doing this. Is that
yes.
I've asked a lot of people who hold this type of view, or maybe a similar view, even the Lutherans and stuff. Is that like, how does this differ from a spiritual presence view?
That's a pretty good point. That's a pretty good
like,
point.
Not in terms of like, I know you want to use the word body, and I know you want to use the word, certain words, but for what those words actually attach to in meaning, how a spirit doesn't have any physical characteristics, and you're saying a body doesn't have any physical characteristics. So I don't know what to deny because I don't know what you're affirming. And I don't know what you're affirming. So how can I deny something that, even though you're using the word body, it has no sense of any normal meaning to the word I usually use.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind exploring that implication one day a bit deeper.
Yeah, so but that to keep in mind. But for now, we can pretend like body means what we normally think of body. But I just want to kind of, I think that's important to mention in the introduction.
Yeah, pretty much. So either way, what the Catholic Church officially believes is that, let's just say this is the bread of Christ. This is the bread that the Eucharist. And with the, how would I say it? With the convocation, is that the right word? Of the priest? Consecration. Or I think either way. So when the priest consecrates the Eucharist at the Mass, he does it, and this is still the same. This bread is still exactly the same as it was before in all of its physical attributes, in all of its properties, except its essential being, its substance. It has now become the body, blood, soul, the reality of Christ himself. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, because what Father Kappes and William Albrecht assert in this video, or what they try to prove, is that a normal change, a normal but still otherwise miraculous kind of transformation, as seen in multiple examples throughout the Bible, is somehow synonymous with the assertion of Rome with transubstantiation, which it is not. Absolutely not. But you're hopefully going to see that for yourself, and I guess we get right to it.
All right.
You tell me whenever you want to stop, Jeff, so you can comment whenever you want, and I'll stop whenever I want to comment.
Okay, all I would have to say is put your seatbelt on. It's going to get weird.
Oh, it is. It's beautiful. You're going to... I hope you guys have a sense of humor, because you need it to get through this.
If anybody lived through Harold Camping
yes,
his numerology, for the end of the world, like, the apostles were 12, and 12 was fish, and
that was 146 fish or something.
Yeah, like, this is the closest to that I've ever seen.
Yes, absolutely. I loved it when you first raised that Harold Camping analogy.
So
it's so
generally
true.
when you're coming up with new arguments for something, I generally find like, I've had what I think is an original thought, and then like someone's thought of it like 400 years ago.
Yeah.
So if you're coming up with a brand new argument to support X, it's probably weird.
Yeah,
that's probably what I would want to
say. Exactly. And we're good to go.
Well, why don't we start with the Bible, since what we want to do is try to understand what we mean by substantial change. I don't know how many of you use the word substance in your daily conversations, but my guess would be we don't normally use words like substance or words like nature very much. So if the mods are available, or if you, our listeners, have your Bible, pull open 2 Peter, 2 Peter. It should be chapter 1, verse 4. We'll try to keep things at the New King James Version. See, it looks like the reading that we have here is, "For by these he has granted to us his precious and magnificent promises, so that by them you may become partakers of the divine nature, which is the same thing. But notice that word nature there. Notice that word nature. I don't know how many of you have thought about what that word nature means. But of course, it doesn't mean nature park or anything like that. I'd be interested to know if anyone knows what Paul and Peter in their world would think a nature is. Do you know how that this is used? Anybody out there want to take a guess on the chat?
I'd like to take a guess, as someone who's especially interested in Paul's writings. Not as much Peter's, although then again it's a limited corpus, so whatever. And as far as I'm aware, that's like the only use in both of Peter's letters that he uses nature, or in the Greek word physis. So yeah, whatever. But with Paul's use of the word, we have some pretty high-profile examples, especially in the first chapter of Romans, when he discusses how idolaters, God gave them over to dishonorable passions that are against nature, unnatural, literally paraphysin in Greek. And this is in reference to, in particular, homosexual relationships, because they're betraying the normative, God-given creational relations of men and women for the acts of, the opposite sex, and then doing that with each other of people of the same sex. And then elsewhere, you have 1 Corinthians chapter 11, where he discusses how would I describe it? Men with long hair is against nature. It's unnatural. Whereas for women, it is natural, and it's her glory, so to speak. So Paul's understanding of nature is more or less something of one's God-given function according to one's own design. So a good way I've heard it put is that form follows function. So you have your certain form of your human body, for example, and according to how that form is, that's your proper function. So men have certain anatomy, women have certain anatomy, and we are supposed to function according to that. And then likewise with long hair. I, for one, have become very sympathetic with Paul's argument that long hair is indeed natural for women. And long hair in Paul's day, if I'm not mistaken, it's not merely like shoulder length, but like really, really long stuff, because there were some elaborate hairstyles back then. But that's a very natural thing for women, not so natural for men, and we can still get that sense when we see a guy with like super
the nature,
long hippie hair.
Paul, just a question there.
Yes.
So the nature there would be based on what women were designed to do.
Yes.
Not so much because men can obviously grow long hair.
Yes. Yeah. So it's a reflection of, how would I say it? It's a reflection of the natural sexual dichotomy. It's a very interesting passage to look at with respect to long hair and short hair, because I know some homosexual apologists like to point that and say, see, natural doesn't mean actually natural as we understand it. But either way, Paul's understanding of nature, of natural, is that form and function are one and the same. But that's not the conclusion that William Albrecht and Father Kappes come to. They don't even go to Paul's own writings to see how Paul understands and how he uses the technical term nature, physis, because it is a term with specific uses, both in the pagan philosophers and in Paul himself as well. But they don't go to Paul's own sources to see what he means by nature, or even what possibly Peter could mean by nature. They go to somewhere else, and I hope you raise an eyebrow at where they go.
I'd be interested to see if you know when we talk about natures, where natures come from. And to help us out, not all of us use this book of Scripture, but to help us out, I'm going to be reading to understand what nature is from a work that all the Second Temple Jews knew, and all the Christian writers of the New Testament knew. Even if you think it's more like the Book of Enoch instead of part of your canon, it's still a very helpful reference, just as it was put in the AD 1611 King James Version. I'm going to read from Wisdom. So if our mods have the ability...
See that? Not Romans, not going to Corinthians, not going to any of Paul's canonical letters, going to the Wisdom of Solomon. Okay.
Yeah, an author should define their own usages.
Pretty much. let's see where it goes with this, and you're going to see the first signs of craziness.
To provide us with wisdom, chapter 19, 18 to 22. That's a lot of verses, 18 to 22. I'm actually going to read you the 1611 King James Version. This is the version that was printed with the King James Bible in the year 1611. So let's see if we can get a little bit better idea of what a nature or a substance are from this book that was so influential on the biblical writers. Of course,
and remember, they're assuming the Catholic understanding, the Aristotelian understanding of substance as some vague inner being that has not necessarily has a outer physical manifestation. It's being in itself. Remember, they're trying to read that in to these passages.
Right. It's almost like I forget. I know there's differences between Aristotle and Plato, but it's almost like a Platonic ideal, right?
Kind of like that. I'm not going to bill myself as an Aristotle or Plato expert, but if the ethereal stuff they like to speculate about, that's what they're trying to, frankly, shoehorn into this stuff. But you'll see how. You viewers will see how.
For Catholics and Orthodox, and even for some versions of Protestant Christianity historically, this Deuterocanon book here is important. Here's my reading. For the elements, of course, you guys need to be thinking of the periodic table, right? For the elements were changed in themselves by a kind of harmony. Of course, that makes us think of music. Like in a psaltery notes, so singing your psalms. Change the name of the tune, and yet are always sounds, which may well be perceived by the sight of the things that have been done. For earthly things were transmuted. I changed that word. For earthly things were transmuted.
You're going to see him do this a lot, where he tries to... It's technically a correct translation, but he tries to put all this kind of technical language that does sound like transubstantiation, in this case transmuted, to try and push the unknowing viewer towards the transubstantiation view without them even knowing. He's going to be very, how would I say it, selective and not so impartial with his translation philosophy. You'll see more of that.
Into watery, and the things that before swam in the water now went upon the ground. The fire had power in the water, forgetting its own virtue. So what kind of things exist in the world where fire has power inside or within water, forgetting its own virtue? The water forgat his own quenching nature. There's that word nature, you see it? Water forgat his own quenching nature. So water is supposed to quench fire. It's supposed to have normal everyday functions where you have a fire in your kitchen and you put it out with water. Of course, we know there's grease fires. That doesn't work out real well. So in normal fires, water puts out the nature of fire.
Now, notice he's putting emphasis on how the word nature is allegedly used here. And don't forget, he's trying to define what Peter and Paul, but more specifically Peter, how they understand nature to be in order to make his argument. Problem. The translations may use the same English word, but the Greek texts do not. In Peter's own passage, 1 Peter chapter 4, when he talks about the divine natures, the theos physis or physeos, I think it's physis. But it's using the word physis, nature. So if you want to understand what that word means, either in a general context or even go into someone's letters, you've got to actually find instances of that word. And in this passage of the Wisdom of Solomon, that technical Greek word, physis, is not anywhere in this passage. It may say that in a English translation, and that's a perfectly acceptable translation, but the actual word used here for water's quenching nature that water allegedly forgot is dunamis, which is power, ability. It's where we get words like dynamo, dynamite, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But the important thing is that that wisdom does not use that word, physis. It's not discussing physis, but the dunamis, the power, the ability of, or even the meaning, because dunamis can also refer to like a definition of something. But it's not using, even if we did grant the possibility of Paul and Peter using the technical sense of Aristotle's understanding of nature, that's not here in wisdom, because the word itself is not there in this specific passage. So it's again, not ascribing deliberate malice or anything, but this is incredibly misleading, incredibly, because you cannot take the gloss of a translation and then use that as a word study for an ancient Greek word when the same word is not even used. So already a huge error, and the first of many in this apologetic presentation. Did you want to say something, Jeff, or should I continue?
No, continue.
Yep.
Nature of fire is to be suffocated by water. On the other side, I'm continuing my reading now. On the other side, the flames wasted not the flesh of corruptible living things, though they walked therein. Neither melted they the icy kind of heavenly meat. Wow. What is the icy kind of heavenly meat? That's manna. That's who Jesus is in John 6. Neither melted they the icy kind of heavenly meat, which in Greek is called the crystal kind of ambrosia food. The crystal kind. The word crystal is used.
I don't know why. I always laugh at that. The crystal kind of ambrosia food. I mean, I don't know why.
I'm feeling there was like... I can't take this seriously.
It's Jeff, please hold it in. It gets you know you've watched this before in
It's
preparation.
like you've cut out a lot of setup, right? Because like it's just that we can't torture people for this long. I don't mean to laugh at them because they went through this much work on this.
Yeah,
but it's just like what?
And an important thing is that he kind of subtly corrects it when he gives a literal rendering of the Greek crystal kind of ambrosia food. But notice how much emphasis he put on the icy kind of heavenly meat. And you can tell, like, in the viewer's psychology, oh, heavenly meat. And then he says, oh, it's manna. And Jesus was the manna. Oh, the meat, the body and the blood of Christ. It's his meat. It's his flesh. Wow, mind blown. There's a typology here. Well, problem, and as his more literal rendering of the Greek kind of shows, the word meat is not used in the Greek. Meat in a generic sense in Greek is kreas. Or if you want to say chicken, and I love chicken, is ornithia, for example. But the word...
Well, I think, you know what might be going on here is when the King James was originally written, there's a word shift in meaning. So I use this as an example with my kids where my flesh is true meat.
Right.
Meat in the early 1600s meant food.
Just in a generic sense?
Just in a generic sense, yes.
Oh, there you go. I didn't know that. Wow.
So they might have like there might be something like the best example of that for our listeners would be in the 1930s. Gay meant happy.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And
right.
It seems that Albrecht and Father Kappes would maybe they're not aware of that, because I didn't even know about the 16th century meaning of meat. I'd like to look it up. There you go. But it appears that they're kind of riding on the modern English understanding of meat, because and if that's the case, that's a perfect rendering, because in the Greek text here the word used is trophe, which is a generic word for nourishment, for food, rearing,
right, yeah.
all stuff like that. So he semi-corrected it afterwards, but not in a conscious way. He didn't say, "Oh, meat is wrong." It's actually
well, that's kind of like you gotta. Anytime you look into a historical source, you gotta be careful about word shifting meaning over time.
Yeah.
So you have to understand when the era is, and that's why there. It's like, oh well, these Greek fathers in the 500s. Because they knew Greek, they would know Greek better than you do today. that the New Testament was written is like, no, that's the equivalent of saying like Shakespeare. And there was much more standardization because of print and stuff.
Not to mention the vast cultural difference of the same language and the same words in a Jewish context, which I think is probably the Achilles heel when it comes to Catholic interpretation. But I don't want to spend too much time on this. It's a small thing. It's a small thing.
It's like I don't know. I grew up in like when New York was kind of more decrepit, and you'd have those people with the you'd bet games, and they'd have the I forget what it's called, but they have a ball under the three cups, and you have to try to follow the ball and stuff. Yeah. So if you're not, that's one of the balls you got to follow. Is like, what did the words mean in the original?
But I don't want to spend too much time on this. It's only a little small thing, and they might not have tried to make that an emphasis. But it's those little things. It's those little things that they kind of rely on the users to kind of take up that are actually not legit. So it's worth taking a little bit of time to
just to give the listener. So what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to connect all these threads to mana. So like anything that kind of resembles mana, and then bring it around to John 6. So that's the map they're trying to lay out.
And so let's not spoil it for the viewers, because we want them to share in our shock and in our pain and our eventual laughter.
Oh, sorry, you can edit that out.
No, it's all good. All good. That's all good. Anyway, let's keep going.
Crystal and ice and snow are all the same thing. Neither melted the icy kind of heavenly meat that was of nature apt to melt. There's that word nature again. For in all things, O Lord.
Okay, I have to immediately stop there. So again, they're relying on the presence of the word nature there. Not even there when it says in the King James translation. It's a perfectly fine translation, but when it comes to word study, you got to be literal, and the word nature is not even there at that point. In that specific little clause there, for the Greek, it is ude tekton, ev tekton, kristalides genos ambrosias trophes, which is literally nor the kind of heavenly food, the crystal kind of heavenly food, which is of nature apt to melt. It does not use the word physis here. It is not saying that this is the nature of this. It is rather using a couple of adjectives, and I think possibly in an intensive form that reflects Hebrew. But either way, it's
What's
using
the heavenly there. It's using mean, like the heavenly there mean for like from the sky.
Ambrosia. I'm not sure. I haven't really studied ambrosia. It might mean it in a kind of like a supernatural sense. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it was like snow comes from the sky.
Yeah. But the important thing is that the adjectives used for, which is of, when it says in the King James, which is of nature apt to melt, the adjectives used there, or adjectives to say the same thing, is tekton and ev tekton. But it's literally just an adjective or phrase. That's it, or clause technically. And that's what those adjectives mean. Something that is that has that nature, if you will, that ability to melt down. But the important thing is that this is just that adjective, those adjectives with the noun, and it's paraphrased in English to say it is of nature apt to melt. The word nature is not used here, so you cannot use this as they are as some kind of definitional word study to understand what Paul and Peter meant by the actual word nature or physis. So already these three, one of them's a little bit of a nitpicky, I'll admit, but at least two major errors already right at the very beginning of this discussion in a very short passage in a work that is not even accepted by us Protestants. So it's kind of a dead in the water proof for us, although I guess they're trying to appeal to historical use of a term, which they don't do. So again, not a good start. Not a very good start, I'd say. But they keep going, so I guess we'll have to as well.
Thou didst magnify thy people and glorify them. Neither didst thou lightly regard them, but didst assist them in every time and place. So now we're starting to get a better idea of what we mean by substances, and which are just another word for natures.
No, we're not. Because we do not have that term in there, and nor is this, I'm not even sure if any of this book at all even assumes the Aristotelian concepts of substance and accidents and nature and all that, which you have to assume for transubstantiation. That's really the key of this whole thing right here. They're assuming their Roman Catholic post-Aristotle Thomistic understanding of substance and natures and just saying, oh, look, we've got the same word here, which they don't even have. But even if we grant that, you've got the same word here, therefore it must mean that same thing, which
you
doesn't.
can't even assume a Greek source would use Aristotle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Aristotle was Aristotle. There's Plato. There's 1,000 other philosophers who agree and disagree with Plato and Aristotle. So you've got to be charitable. You've got to let the sources speak for themselves, which, let's be frank, Roman Catholics can't, at least with respect to the early church fathers. They have to see the church fathers saying what they want them to say in order to get their proof text. But that's another topic, and that's actually the second half of their video, which we won't be going over here. But look, either way, they're reading stuff into the sources which are not there. There's no evidence of them being there, and they're just assuming it. And ordinary lay viewers who aren't privy to these areas of study, it goes right over them, and it becomes into their thinking. They don't even consider the fallacies that are being engaged here. It's just you can see why if you look in the comments of this video, which is linked below, by the way, if you want to see the whole thing. You can see why in the comments people are like, wow, this is mind-blowing. This is crazy. I never thought about this. Well, because I can almost guarantee that every single one of those comments there, those people are not engaged in any seriously in-depth level of the study of the scriptures, which is not an insult because that's not for everyone, but it's indicative of, how would I say it, being a layman. So anyway, you have anything to say, Jeff, or you just want to keep going?
No.
Yep.
Let's go.
Lovely.
So elements have something to do with natures. So if you have all studied chemistry, you would know that there are all these elements on the periodic table. Each one of those would be considered a nature or a substance. When we combine...
Not in the Aristotelian sense. Science has progressed from that. I think scientists themselves would tell you that, but whatever.
Let's say our oxygen and our hydrogen together and we get water. There's a molecule. That's a kind of a substance for us.
No.
In the ancient world, if you combined copper and tin and you got bronze, that's a kind of substance. Also, plants are substances and animals are substances. And of course, people are substances.
And we don't want people to be misled. Like substance in a generic sense of like what a thing is. Yeah, okay, cool. We're all for that. So in that literal sense, they're right. But they have to assume, and they do, as Roman Catholics assume, this Aristotelian sense of substance. And no, it's not assumed. So anyway.
So if you're starting to notice a pattern, substances tend to be these stable kinds of things in the Old Testament and then in the New Testament, whether wisdom or in Peter. They're stable kinds of things and they have natures. So a substance is a stable kind of thing, like the elements, like the molecules, like the plants, and like the animals. And they have natures. And the natures mean that they have certain activities. So we expect...
I didn't see this before, but I have a feeling he might be conflating natures with accidents. Because the accidents are the properties and the activities of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it almost seems like he's... So it almost looks like, if everyone here remembers what we talked about with substance and accidents and all that, it almost looks like he's using nature with respect... Like in this specific part here, he's using nature to refer to activities and action and properties and stuff like that, which is accidents in the technical sense for the Roman Catholic. But then earlier, he was doing a discussion on what nature means, and it came across as like being something to do with substance, and it's confused. It's really confused, but
it is confused.
Very, very confused. And I've actually, if you might notice a jump or two if you're watching, like a little jump or two, it's because I had to edit out quite a bit of dead air. Just because, well, it doesn't appear they were the most organized, which I can't really talk because, to be fair, I have to flick through my Bible a little bit just to get to their points. But yeah, there'll be a few cuts you'll see.
Water to flow, that's an activity. We expect plants to grow, that's an activity. We think that humans, the best thing that they can do is think. And we even have this in the New Testament, where we hear about rational and irrational animals. When we hear about the rational and the irrational. So let me give you an example. 2 Peter 2:12. It may say something like this in your translation. They are like irrational animals. that whole idea of being rational and irrational is talking about the nature of a substance.
So what? So what?
Yeah, they do a lot of this in this video, in this section, like this area. It's like, okay, like
Yeah.
do we really need to go over 10 examples of these? But okay, I
Yeah.
guess we are.
Yeah. And we don't want to be repeating ourselves, but we might have to because all their examples are pretty much okay, so what?
So what we need to understand then is that substances are biblical, natures are biblical,
No, they're not, at least in the Aristotelian sense.
and that what they mean is that things like water, things like plants, have certain natural functions. This is St. Paul's argument, in Romans 2, right? That if you go to Romans 2 and you hear why homosexuality and why homosexual acts are immoral, it's because we have natures. So God built these genitalia, and these genitalia are supposed to come together in a very natural way. Mm-hmm. These genitalia are supposed to come together, combine, and they produce children, and it continues the race. And so they serve perfectly their function when they're doing that, and only when they're doing that. When they do anything else, they're not acting according to design.
Mm-hmm. And he's totally correct there. That's actually spot on with how we should understand nature biblically. But then he needs to ask himself if he wants to be consistent, okay, how am I stretching and twisting this understanding of nature in order to argue for a Thomistic Aristotelian concept?
So St. Paul wants to tell us that there are natures out there, and there's a natural law how nature should act, and that we should not go against that nature, right? So what we've then found together is there are natures and there are substances as far as the New Testament is concerned. We can describe those natures. And so what do we mean by transubstantiation? All we mean is what is in Wisdom 19, but I'll ask you to...
Wrong, you don't mean... Mate, you don't read it. Again, people, read the Catechism. Read the papal documents themselves on what transubstantiation means. That is... I don't know how they can say that with a straight face if they actually know what they're talking about. That is not what that means at all.
They might be a little confused.
Possibly. I don't want to give ill intention, but...
Pull up Exodus, I think it is 17:7, but I want to make sure that I have the right scripture verse there. So 7:17, I believe. Yeah, I believe so. And the fish in the river died, and stank thereupon. The Egyptians could not drink from the river, and the water in the land of Egypt, and the charmers also of the Egyptians did so with their sorceries. That's just talking about changing things. Let's see here. I can't get the exact verse in the midst of all these. But anyway, if you go to Exodus 7, if somebody has the verse and they can find it, it talks about changing a serpent or a staff into a serpent in Exodus 7. It's between Exodus 7, 8 through 17. 8 through 17. I can't see which one is about changing the staff into a serpent. But the word there that is used for that change of a staff into a serpent is the word transmutation, transmute. You'll just see the word change. The word change in Exodus 7, around verse 10 or so, that word, yeah, there we go. Thank you, Lena. When Pharaoh shall speak unto you, say, shew a miracle for you. Then thou shalt say unto Aaron, take thy rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent. There you go. That word become, if you guys take out your Brenton Septuagint, which is available free online, the word become there is the word meta. You know the word meta, meaning to go across, and ballo, which means to throw or to put across. To put across is the word of saying transmute or change. So we already have our first example of a substantial change in the Old Testament.
Okay, so yet another basic error. That word metaballo, it's true, it means like a form of transformation. that's not used until around verse 19 with reference to the water turning into blood. Instead, the word used for the serpent, or the rod becoming a serpent in around specifically verse 15, when the staff becomes a serpent before Pharaoh, or rather when that's being commanded, the word used there is specifically, straphisan, which literally means turn, like literal turn. So the English is kind of one for one there. But yeah, just another little basic error that a regular viewer couldn't pick up on him even.
Let's just assume he's correct, okay?
Yeah, sure. It's like
let's assume he's correct. Like, hey, I did this miracle, Pharaoh, and look at my staff. It's a snake now, but it still has the accidents of a staff. Do you think you're do you think your actual miracles actually do things?
Yeah,
that's why they're
shock and horror. And it's funny because the main word in that where we get the concept of miracle from, I forgot the exact Hebrew word used, but it literally just means a sign. And the concept of miracle as like specifically a supernatural thing more or less develops later, but it comes from that Hebrew concept of God giving a sign, and specifically referred to something that was seen, that was understood and perceived by the people to whom that sign was performed.
And I'm pretty sure if that was the substance without the accidents, that Pharaoh's sorcerers have been able to replicate that.
Yeah,
for Pharaoh.
I mean, I was intending to make that exact same kind of quip about this section. Okay, so God gave the miracle of transubstantiation to Moses' rod before Pharaoh in order to fight the other snakes. Here's the rod. Oh, it's a snake now. Come on, go, just kicking it now. Come on, go get him. I mean, I think the closest thing to real life actual manifestation of transubstantiation is when, like, Jeff, because you have little kids, when they're playing with their Legos or their action figures, and it's like, oh look, this is this bad guy, and they're like playing and pretending that they're actually the things. Like they have the accidents of a toy action figure, but in its substance, it's Action Man or the Cobra or one of those other things. That's the only real life example of trans stuff, but that's not happening here, and I think they would realize that, but I don't know.
Maybe their point is like things change substance.
I'm thinking that too, just like in a generic things transform in the Bible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like who is arguing that things can't change?
Yeah.
Or or natures can't change. No one's arguing this. So why do we need to spend this time on this? From their perspective.
Yeah, more or less.
That when you take something like a stick or a staff that's made out of wood, you have Moses that casts it right there in Exodus, and it becomes a serpent. The real word there is metabalo, which means to change into or to transmute into. This is the ancient Christian word still used by all the Orthodox churches who speak Greek for the Eucharist, is that when the bread and wine changes, it becomes like a staff became a serpent. It becomes the body and blood of Christ. So this is actually still the definition that is used in both the Catholic and the Orthodox churches to describe.
Whoa, still the definition. Hang on, you haven't even established that was the definition, this concept of a substance yet non-accidental change in a subject when metavalo is used. You haven't even established that. You can't just assume your current concept back on there without evidence.
Yeah, and then again, we're still talking about things that in Aristotle, like the idea of a substance changing without the accidents changing is not in Aristotle's thought.
Yeah, that's right. Although I guess that's why they'd say no. That's why it's the miracle of the Eucharist. So it's something that like can't normally happen, but God makes it happen. But whatever. Whatever. It's just Catholic things. Hashtag just Catholic things.
Describe what happens at Eucharist, at the communion service. That at one moment you have a staff, bread, and at the next moment you have a change, which is into a serpent, which is the body and blood of Christ. That is that word metabalo, which means transmute, becomes a little bit more technical. We call it transubstantiation a few centuries later.
I like when he said that, how he kind of is. I just edited to go black at this point so we can gather
Just
our
a
thoughts.
few centuries later.
Yeah, just a few centuries later. I like when he said that. That word becomes a little bit more technical, just a little bit more technical. A few centuries later, with respect to the Eucharist. So I kind of like how he's implicitly acknowledging that there was a difference.
11th century, right? It's the
I really like that he's implicitly acknowledging that this concept of transubstantiation, it's not in that word originally, and yet here they are using it as a proof text. Like, what are they trying to say even? I mean, oh man. But anyway, this little black frame here, that's our sign for a time to kind of gather our thoughts. What do you think so far, my man?
just okay. Like, at this point, if I didn't watch this already, it'd be a question is like, where are you going with this? Again, things change. You're using examples of stuff that change, but natures, but they change accidents. So, what are you trying to establish? This is a lot of words to say things change.
Yeah, a lot of that. Yep. Next section coming up manages to get even wilder, and trust me, viewers,
Buckle
you'll
up.
see it. Buckle up.
Let me use another great example to get us ready to read John 6 for the first time with our eyes wide open. If you really want to understand what Jesus is...
That's right, with our eyes wide open, with the true secret knowledge that we have and no one else has. And you must come to us to get that secret knowledge because of our successes from the apostles. Yo, anyone study Gnosticism, you know what I'm talking about.
saying in John 6 when he calls himself manna, you want to pay attention to this. And we're not talking about what Catholics call transubstantiation. We're talking about manna right now. About manna. If you want to understand what John is saying, in John chapter 6, beginning around verse, I believe, 25, let me make sure that I got it right here. John 26, around verse 25 and beyond, then you need to listen to these verses. Jesus calls himself manna. What does that mean? Well, the first thing I'd like us to do, if our mods could put up Genesis 19, verses 24 to 26. Genesis 19, verses 24 to 26. I think we've modified the King James Version again. I'm going to read my version to you all. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain and all the inhabitants in the cities that grew on the ground. But Lot's wife, looked behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. You all know this story. There's no mystery what's going on here. But look what's happening here. There's really two really cool things happening here. And these are both noticed by the New Testament and early Christians. The first is, do you notice that there's this stuff that is called rain? It's raining down. And it's brimstone. You know what the modern word for brimstone is? It's sulfur. Sulfur is a crystal. And it's yellowish. And it's raining down. And it's fiery. So we have fiery rain. When is the most famous time that we have fiery rain in the Bible? It's in Revelation, where we have fiery rain. Remember how in the book of Revelation, one of the ways in which the fiery rain is described is in Revelation, I believe, 16:21. It's described as 60-pound yellow figs. It's yellowish. This yellowish stuff is falling from heaven. Just like
Can you pause for a second?
Yes.
Okay, I needed like a graph or something, like a map of this. So like a chartboard with the "It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia" guy, like Pepe Sylvia in the background. Okay, so we have fire, sulfur, which is a crystal, raining down in Sodom.
That's right.
Okay.
I think
so
he's
Lot's wife becomes a pillar of salt. That's the second thing. And then what's the third connection he's trying to make there?
I believe he's just about to make it here. How he's about to connect it to Jesus somehow.
Okay.
Did you ever notice that? That whatever is happening in Sodom and Gomorrah is happening at the end of time in the book of Revelation. This yellowish, fiery rain is falling from heaven. The next thing that we want to concentrate on is the fact that this fire rain that is falling from heaven is a meteorological phenomenon, right? So it's happening.
Pay attention, people.
Like weather. It's a weather phenomenon. If you want to understand what manna is, you got to understand that it has something to do with clouds. It has something to do with clouds raining down stuff. And the stuff that it's raining down is crystal. Not unlike yellowish sulfur. This fiery sulfur is an anticipation of the word of God, Jesus, raining down from heaven in John 6.
Bro. What? How, man?
I can't. All right. So manna in reality, I've always been told. Okay, so in my Bible readings, it was I guess I hit Exodus in February or so. It had the taste of coriander, right?
I think it looked like coriander.
Looked like coriander. So that's not really a crystal, is it? Like,
I mean, it's describing appearance. So okay, appearance. Oh no, accidents. Oh, just how they managed to do this is it actually. So you actually got to step back and really appreciate it. It's.
I should have taken a psychedelic or something. Like listening to this.
I mean, look, I think so. Like, it's very easy to mock it and then just leave it at there. And some viewers might be like, "Wait, what's wrong with this?" But look, to really explain, okay, you have no evidence whatsoever that there is any kind of substantial connection between sulfur, ice, and flipping manna. One of which is edible and the other drinkable, I guess, but sulfur is not. And if you're... How do you get that typology? That the stuff coming from heaven to destroy the wicked is foretelling the coming of the manna of heaven, that is Christ, to save us.
Well, okay,
that's backwards.
So let's draw on how typology works here.
Yes.
So Jesus is making a typology, which means that not every feature is pertinent. Okay. What is the pertinent thing? Is that it was given by heaven, which basically means given by God.
Yep.
Okay. Comes down from heaven, and you consume it for nourishment.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's you're not looking for every little detail, and if you collected too much Jesus on the sixth day, or you know what I mean, it would rot after the Sabbath, or you're not trying to look for every little detail to match. So it's just like Jesus's spiritual food like the manna is physical food, both are given by God.
Yeah,
That's all you need.
It's that simple.
What they're
The way I thought of it is that, and you'll see at the end of this, or at least once they hit John 6, is that ultimately they're saying they're proving exactly what Protestants and Catholic and Orthodox alike all believe, that Christ is the manna from heaven. But they don't address I guess they kind of try to, but ultimately that's what their stuff is going for, which is futile, because we all acknowledge Christ is the manna from heaven. The issue is, what does that mean? Are we going to import some foreign Greek philosophical concept, which itself needs to be tortured a little bit more just to get it to fit with the Catholic doctrine? Are we going to interpret it by that and say that it's literally happening that way, like in an actual physical sense? Or are we going to take it by the simple fact that it's typology, and Christ is comparing himself with the manna from heaven and taking qualitative features in that and applying it to himself? Big picture. Yeah. That's right, big picture. And I thought of them, the way I think of Albrecht and Father Kappes here, as I think of them like a couple of cyclists, and they're trying to get from A to B, and B is like a couple meters down the road. They just got to go straight line, straight there. That's it. All right, Christ says he's the manna from heaven. Manna in Exodus was this miraculous food God gave to nourish Israel, and just as manna is a miraculous food to save and keep people alive and nourish them, likewise Christ is brought down for us in order to bring us eternal life, so that we never have to spiritually thirst or hunger ever again. Done. That easy. Instead, they're trying to get to B as well, but rather than just going the straight line and riding that straight line down the road, they are circumnavigating the earth and taking a dozen wrong turns as they're getting there. They eventually get there, but only after circumnavigating the earth, making a dozen wrong turns, when they didn't have to do that. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, there has to be like, I did go on a 8-mile bike ride today where I took some hills on purpose, but it was for a purpose. It wasn't to it wasn't to get into a straight line. I don't know what that is in kilometers. But the other thing they're doing typology wise is that sulfur has this feature, and this has this feature, and this is kind of like manna. So manna has this feature, which is not the. So this is where the typology is kind of, or their methodology for typology is breaking down. Whereas, like, well, just I ordered a cheesesteak and pizza from, because I live near Philadelphia, so I eat cheesesteaks, right? So that's food, and manna is food. So I'm just like, you can make it's like a crazy game.
Yeah. I'm just going to make sure, Jeff, after you consecrate that cheesesteak, do you make sure that you have the leftovers in a special little thing in your house? Undisturbed?
There are no leftovers.
Not even the little crumbs, man? Are you sure you treat them? Oh, man. Oh, man. But I hope you guys
What are these leftovers of which you speak?
But, like, look, I hope your viewers can see what we're getting at here. This is, as I call it, typological eisegesis, where you have no standard by which to apply your typology, and you can just make up whatever you want. Of course, they do have a standard that is whatever the church says today, but it's not a standard for the Bible.
Yep. This is the type of thing that scares people off of typology, where they just say, you know what, unless the typology is in the New Testament, I'm not going to do this. Well, like, I think there is some typology, like, again, but you mentioned a comment to me offline a while ago that I think is good, is that typology, even in the New Testament, I don't see much being established by just typology.
Yeah, that's right.
It's typology is used to kind of illustrate things that are already clearly laid out.
Precisely, that's right. Yeah, typology, right, as far as I'm aware, is not in and of itself, unless it's like a literal thing. Like, for example, the suffering servant in Isaiah, a very clear messianic prophecy. So at that point, it's not even like, it's typological, but it's not typological in the kind of weak sense where you're drawing parallels between things, but rather it's actually saying this is going to happen in the future, if that kind of makes sense. But
right. I mean, you have the Passover, which is probably the nearest prophetic typology, but that is.
But even then, we only know that because of God's own direct revelation. and his own
Right, yes.
self-sacrifice and such like that. But I was going to say that with their, you can use their same lack of standard where they don't have anything controlling their typology except their own preconceived notions of the church authority and all that. You can take their same method or lack thereof of typology to say anything you want. And an example I like to think of is, well, okay, Jesus is polyamorous. Jesus, or rather polygamous. He has many wives. And we can say that typologically because like in the other example where Catholics appeal to, when they try to say, oh, how's Mary the Queen Mother of the Church and of the Kingdom of God, you know? They try to point to, oh, see, in Israel, they had this concept, they had this office of a Queen Mother. And just as that's the case, it's also fitting that Mary is somehow this Queen Mother in God's kingdom. And I say,
anytime you hear it is fitting, hold on to your wallet.
oh, yeah, absolutely. Because they're not using God's standard of what is fitting. They're using what's convenient to their apologetic.
Well,
But-
no. What it is fitting means is that it's like I would really like if I were God, I would do X.
Yeah, exactly.
As opposed to like, well, that's a huge extrapolation. But yeah.
Yeah. And I like to think, look, okay, if you can establish typology from any little angle of ancient Israel you want, well, okay, in that case, the kings of Israel, especially the messianic typology himself, King David, he had multiple wives. So it's only typologically fitting that Jesus himself, as the husband, has multiple brides. And who are the brides? Well, of course, all the individual members of the church. We're all individually the bride of Christ. And you know, that's not a stretch for Roman Catholicism. They do have consecrated virgins who are talked about them themselves being, if I'm not mistaken, they are considered like a bride of Christ in a more direct sense. And of course, they wouldn't take that to mean like God's polygamous, but I mean...
Well, you could use that typology. Let's just like, I say like, okay, so Jews would be one bride, Muslims would be another bride.
Yeah, that's right. We have multiple...
And
all the nations are
support,
different
like,
brides.
And support post-Vatican II changes to no salvation outside the church.
Yeah, that's right. And just as Israel was considered collectively one bride of Christ, or one bride of Yahweh specifically, after the New Testament period, we have the gospel opening up to all nations. So it only makes sense logically, typologically, that all the nations themselves are all individual new brides of Christ. And now a Catholic might say, but Paul himself says that the church itself is the bride of Christ, not each individual nation. But then, of course, we can typologically appeal to how King David himself had a favorite wife, a higher wife above the others, that is Bathsheba. And likewise, just as Christ himself has a favorite bride, the church as a whole, that doesn't discount that he has other wives that he also loves, just to a lesser extent. Ladies and gentlemen, typological eisegesis. It's a beautiful thing. It really is.
And we'll be able to prove that by the book of Revelation as well. But there's another important part here. Did you notice the other part of the verse? The other part of the verse says that not only did it rain down the Lord God from heaven, this fiery substance, but the fiery substance was something that...
Can you pause?
Lot's wife...
Did he say the Lord rained down?
They
rained the Lord down?
No, I think he said... I think because like this is actually a very interesting passage for Trinitarianism, but it said the passage says the Lord rained down from the Lord fire onto Sodom.
Right. So what's being rained down? I'm not sure if they're going there, but what rained down was the sulfur, not the Lord himself.
Oh, you thought? Hang on. What if we go back a second or two? Am I able to do that? Whatever. Okay, so
because I could have sworn he said the Lord was being rained down. But
you know
let's can we rewind that? Maybe that's not what they're saying.
Yeah, let's hope not.
Says that not only did it rain down the Lord God from heaven, this fiery...
Yeah, he said that.
Oh, no. Okay, I think he kind of mixed up his voice. He was saying not only did it rain down the Lord God fire from heaven. I think he's trying to say God, Lord is the subject.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so
substance.
Yeah.
But the fiery substance was something that Lot's wife turned back and looked at. And what did she see? Well, she saw the fiery substance falling, and she turned into a pillar of salt. This is big time important for early Christians and for Jews and for New Testament writers. Why? Because God took a human being
Now, notice he never goes on to actually demonstrate how it's this allegedly big importance. What does he even mean by that? Like, in what way is it so critical to them? He doesn't really end up demonstrating this, except saying, "Oh, Philo said something about it. There's something in the Targum about it." These are just bold assertions. That's it, and this goes way past the layman's head. But he's not proving anything.
In one moment, she's a human substance and she has a human nature. And the next moment, she becomes salt. The next moment,
Which you
she
can
becomes
observe,
salt.
but okay.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Oh no! But she actually didn't become salt in the accident. See, she retained her physical form as a human, obviously, but in her substance, she became salt. Yeah, sure. They're not arguing that, but they have to argue that if they want to make it parallel.
There's your substantial change.
No, isn't that
No.
what they should be?
That's what-
Isn't that what they should be arguing? It's like here are other examples of substances changing but not changing accidents.
Yeah, that's right. They're not.
But they're
that's the
just
whole
saying,
problem
like,
with this. Yeah.
Things change. Okay, that's great. All right.
Yep.
Keep going.
Fantastic. We're not. I mean, you know exactly. If you're talking to naturalists, then okay, cool, you got something. But we're not naturalists. We understand that can happen miraculously. 1 second, pause. We're going to be another 10 or so minutes. Thank you. It's my mum. God bless her.
God takes one substance and changes it into another. How else do we explain that? Now, I'm going to read to you, which is quoted in our book on transubstantiation. I'm going to read to you an Aramaic translation of Genesis 19:26, which talks about why it's important that Lot's wife was turned to salt. Here's the translation that was known in Jesus's day. Listen. And because the wife of Lot was from the daughters of the Sodomites, she looked back to see what would be the end of her father's house. And behold, she stands as a pillar of salt until the time the dead are brought to life.
Now, notice he doesn't cite what this translation is, and I actually looked it up just to make sure. He's not citing a translation per se, but something called a Targum, or a Targum.
They're like
rather.
paraphrasing.
They're think of it this way: they're Aramaic Passion
message.
Translation. Look, the message I think is more of a paraphrase, but the Passion Translation is a genuine Targum in its own right. Like it just adds stuff that's just not there. Like that's what a Targum is basically, for those who don't know, an ancient form in Aramaic of translation where translation and commentary would be combined into one. So you'd have a certain passage, but then you'd have extensions to that passage that try to explain it in a way of a commentary. And originally they weren't written, but eventually by the 1st or 2nd century, I believe, they were written down. But notice notice the sloppiness, if I may be frank, the sloppiness here of how he just says an Aramaic translation. Well, for one, that's translation is putting it very nicely, but also he doesn't even bring up it's a Targum, nor which Targum, because there's multiple Targums, multiple of which deal, not all, but multiple of which deal with this exact passage. And I hunted it down. Specifically, it is Targum Yerushalmi, or Targum Jerusalem, and I think another one. But that's the main one he's looking at. And I haven't researched it much. I'm not sure what the provenance of it is, whether it's like even from the 2nd century or 1st century or whatever. But
no, they could have been intertestamental period.
Yeah. They could be quite early. But point being, basic information like that, which is helpful for those who have a genuine interest in studying this stuff, he doesn't even provide that. You have to manually search for the things he says, just from the clues of what he's saying in order to actually find it. He doesn't even provide, he doesn't do the due diligence that you should do if you're trying to present an argument and allow people to even check it up for themselves. And that's what I always try to do with my stuff. That's what you do, Jeff, with your stuff. You're quite direct with what you're citing, all good sources, good and bad. That's what I do as well. But
usually in the description or something.
Yeah, that's right. And they hardly do it here. They hardly do. And when they do, they often, misquote some stuff like metabalo and referring to a snake when it's not. But either way, it's just these little things. It's these little things that do not speak well for this presentation.
Until the time the dead are brought to life. That's the translation that people in
Paraphrase.
Jesus' day would have known. As you can see, there's some commentary in there. What does Lot's wife represent? Lot's wife represents changing one substance into another substance as an anticipation of God changing the substance of our stony, rocky bones back into flesh again on the last day.
No, that's technically yes, but that's not what it's saying. It's resurrection. Lot's wife died when she turned to salt, okay? Unless you want to posit something else, she died, and she's going to be resurrected on the last day like everyone
Along
else.
with all the righteous and the wicked are resurrected in the last day.
Precisely. Simple as that. And that literally makes no sense when he says that the substance of our rocky bones is going to be changed back into flesh. I'm sorry, but we have both bones and flesh. I mean, when I heard this, I immediately thought the Valley of Dry Bones in Ezekiel's vision, how he preached the bones.
Maybe he meant like after you decompose or something.
I mean, but that still doesn't make sense. Like your flesh when you die doesn't transmute or transubstantiate into bone. Like in that Valley of Dry Bones thing, the tendons and the flesh grew back over the bones, which then became living bodies. That's not transubstantiation. When we die, we don't have a Eucharistic miracle of our own bodies, so to speak, where it turns from flesh to bone. We will regain the fleshly and living aspects of our bodies on top of our bones. I'd say you can't make this stuff up, but apparently you can. So
I don't even know where they got this from.
Yeah, look, it's ultimately just from having interacted with traditional Roman Catholics a lot who go with proof text. It's even if they don't realize it, it's really just desperation. It's like you've got to find something, and if you can do one or two steps to get there that are totally unwarranted, then so be it. It's a sad thing to watch, really.
So she stands as a sign of God's ability to resurrect us. She stands as a sign of God's ability
a sign of
to
judgment?
resurrect us.
I mean, more or less, yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's keep plugging.
Yeah.
A great example of this is in the New Testament. So now I'm going to turn to the Gospel. If you could put up mods, Matthew.
I might call it pause here because I talked to Jeff in a little bit of a break before, but I've got to hit it at this time. I've actually got some stuff to do with my phone and then some lunch with Mum. This has gone way longer than I expected, but it does mean 2 parts, which will be awesome. More content, more viewing for you guys. Yeah, so what about some final thoughts, Jeff?
Yeah, it's just like their game plan is just to. They need a better game plan.
Yeah,
they need a game plan. They need just like, well, this is manna. This looks like this, and Jesus says he's manna, so therefore, like the real presence of transubstantiation is all over the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think is that basically what their argument is?
That's basically what they're trying to say, and you can really only get that by like watching this thing like twice over, and then maybe noting stuff down and then charting it yourself, because they're really slow about it. They're really slow.
The other thing I would mention is that the way I think typology should work is that you recognize the Bible is Messiah centric. So you have things pointing to the Messiah from the past, and things in our present, like the sacraments and stuff, point backwards to the Messiah, right? So the Lord's Supper, or communion or Eucharist, or however you want to call it, point to what Jesus has done. And stuff in the Old Testament points back to Jesus. But they want typology to point to a sacrament. So it's like signs pointing to signs.
Yeah.
As opposed to the greater reality the signs point to.
Yeah, that's right.
Does that make sense?
That does make perfect sense. It is kind of convoluted.
So when you're like, so if you see something in the Old Testament, like, oh, that kind of does remind me of the Lord's Supper. Well, the reason is because there's things pointing to Jesus, and the Lord's Supper points to Jesus.
Yeah. And I think a couple, maybe some of their arguments here would be valid if they could actually first establish that John 6 is transubstantiation in the first place. Like,
well, that goes to your point.
Their typological inference, it all does, and I think they more or less recognize this, that it all hinges on our understanding of John 6. If it can be demonstrated that John 6 is this piece of bread here and this piece of wine, it is actually my body and blood. If they can demonstrate that, and in an Aristotelian sense, if they can do that, then their
typology would still be wonky.
It would still be absolutely crazy. Some of their inferences may work, but a lot of it, if not most of it, is just still what the heck. Even if we granted transubstantiation in John 6, but yeah, it goes. It's. I was gonna say when you mentioned like how they don't even have a game plan, they're just going here, there, and everywhere. I was gonna mention. I think I raised this with you before. How like. It's like that guy from Pacific Rim after he does the whole mind meld theme with the, I don't know if you've seen Pacific Rim or
I have. It's the awesomest dumb movie ever, or the dumbest awesome movie ever.
Oh, absolutely. Either one of those. It's kind of like Trinity, 3 in 1, 1 in 3. Either way works. But it's that guy. He tries to do that mind melding partnership with that monster brain, and he ends up going like bonkers, but in like a smart way. And you see he has this big board with all these little things pinned up on it, and like all these red lines and red pieces of string connecting them all together. And he's like, "Oh, see, he kind of looks like a crazy guy pinning all these irrelevant things together." That's not to disrespect them unnecessarily, but that's kind of what this looks like here. We have this little thing here. Oh, now we have this. Oh, now we have this. Now we have this, and you're drawing them all arbitrarily together with this red yarn to try and make some kind of map that does not exist except in your own imagination.
And I think the last point I would want to make is that typology in the New Testament is generally not considered like, I don't know of any example of typology that is beyond like more of an illustration rather than a proof.
Yeah,
I can't think of any.
Yeah,
it's like Jesus is our Passover, but that's already after we already explained all this other stuff.
Yeah, that's right. I guess I might know one or two examples where a typology is kind of used like a minor proof, but it's only after that reality has been established before. Like
there might be some other. If you're thinking of what I'm thinking, there might be like Hosea out of Egypt, I called my son.
Stuff like that. It's which is like
that's almost like a prophetic. That's like Israel does something. That's not even typology.
Even then, it's more like it would be typology, but it's more like illustration, as you'd say. And even if it was some kind of a proof, it's more or less like a subordinate proof. It relies first on this major reality being established, and then, hey, look, with this reality established, look at all these typological verses. It makes sense and all that stuff, you know.
Well, there's also a thing in the New Testament where something happened to Israel, and it's going to happen to the Messiah, who is like the greater true Israel.
Yeah, which
you can establish that pattern in Isaiah 40 to 50,
right,
where the Messiah is the pinnacle of Israel.
Yeah, got ya.
So if something happened to Joseph, or something happened to David, it's like greater David, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that concludes part 1 of our response to William Albrecht and Father Kappes on specifically on Sam Shamoun's YouTube channel, who I otherwise really like him, but as soon as he recently went Orthodox, I believe, from Lutheran.
Sam Shamoun went off on me a few years ago.
Oh, really?
On YouTube. Yeah, he has some anger issues, so I've been marking and avoiding him for a couple years now, and he unfortunately has proven me correct.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a shame because like I actually quite admire him, like personally, with his fervor, and I do even like in certain instances how he uses what I believe is a righteous anger, but he does go off in some certain areas where I'm just like, bro, you got to chill, man. That's just not Christ-like.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, that's neither here nor there. This is part 1 of our response. More stuff is coming, and even crazier stuff is coming. I can assure you, this is not even the half of it. Thank you all for watching. I hope you tune in next time, and God bless.